Welcome back to the Coachable Podcast. This is your host, Tori Gordon, and I am so thrilled about this conversation that you're tuning into because I am joined by one of the greatest spiritual teachers I have come in contact throughout my life, who has had a profound impact, not just on me personally, but with her over 4 decades of devotion to teaching the principles of a book called A Course in Miracles, her new book called Mystic Jesus that has recently hit shelves, and her best-selling book, A Return to Love, along with many others that have been bestsellers and have touched the lives of millions. Marianne Williamson is here today to have a discussion about this new book, Mystic Jesus, and how it can transform our lives right now, that this not just historical figure, but this mystical man and spirit of Christ consciousness can be the conduit for what we need on this planet right now to transform our world by transforming our hearts. And there's no one other than Marianne Williamson that I would be more excited to talk to today. And so I'm thrilled to welcome you back to the show. This is not your first time here, and I'm so glad that you're sharing a little bit more time with me today. So welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your generous introduction. And it's great to be here with you.
Yeah. Right before we hit record, we were going over kind of our history, and you and I, for those who don't know and haven't listened to maybe the original podcast that we did several years ago, back in 2020, you and I met when you were on the presidential campaign trail back then, and I was living in Atlanta at the time. You had come into town to do a talk, and I picked up my camera, ran down. I found out that day that you were going to be in town, and I went down to where you were speaking, and someone from your team asked me if I could take some photos of you. So in a divine orchestrated event, I was able to meet you in person then, and then you came on the show several years ago, and it's beautiful, obviously, to have you back. But the teaching and the work that you've been doing for well over 4 decades has truly been some of the most transformative work that I've come in contact with in terms of helping me rearrange my perspective and my internal programming around God and what God is and who Jesus is. I was somebody who grew up Christian. I thought for many years, I was someone who was always a spiritual seeker, asking deep questions about who am I? Why am I here? What are we doing? And I don't think I know that I'm not alone in that. But your work helped to frame a lot of the biblical texts that I was familiar with in a way that really helped illuminate the deeper truths within it outside of a dogmatic religious context. For those who aren't familiar with A Course in Miracles or your work, can you give people understanding what that is and how it is different than the traditional Christian approach to looking at who Jesus is and what his teachings are here to teach us?
Well, I think a lot of people have felt like, yes, we understand the concepts, we understand certain doctrine, but that has nothing to do with whether or not we're able to apply it in a meaningful way in our lives. Mm-hmm. So there is across the board now a lot of rejection of old religious institutions, their dogma and their doctrine, but people don't want to feel they threw away the baby with the bathwater. So it's not like people say, all right, Jesus was a historical figure 2,000 years ago, central to the Christian religion. That's great. Nobody's demeaning that, disrespecting that, or undermining it. And yet we're living at a time when, whether it's the Christian religion or any of the other universal spiritual themes at the heart of all the great religious teachings, people want to know, how do I apply this to my life now in a way that is genuinely transformational? What is the practical application? So, like you said, there is the Jesus who was the man, the historical figure who lived 2,000 years ago, and then the mystical notion of the Christ, which once again is not a new concept. This is it's a legacy called Gnosticism, mysticism, that has been around from the beginning of Christendom, in which we're talking about what I talk about in this book, which is a spiritual aspect of our consciousness living in us. That it's not just Mary who gave birth to Jesus in a manger, but that each of us, when our hearts are open, we are giving birth to him on the earth today. And we want to remember that all the great religious systems have their mystical element. In Judaism, there is the Kabbalah. In Islam, there is Sufism. So the whole idea of the mystical themes at the heart, the spiritual themes at the heart of all the great religious systems are universal. So this is not a Jesus that can be monopolized by one particular religion. So there are people who relate and embrace the concept of, as you were saying, the Christ consciousness, the code. You know, all the great scriptural stories are codes. And when I say that, what I mean is they're cluing us into something, meaning this is not just about the story of Jesus or the story of Buddha or the story of Moses. This is about all of our stories. All of us born when the heart is impregnated with God. All of us told by the angels or the thoughts of God that something new is going to come about when we allow God in our hearts. All of us living on the earth meant to have this ministry where our humanness has mothered, our God has fathered a new sense of self. All of us will face the crucifixions of the fear-based mind and what it would do to invalidate that love within us. And all of us, as we hold our hearts in love, will experience the resurrection in our own lives or that return to sanity. I think that that's what we're talking about here. In the Course in Miracles, it uses these traditional Christian concepts, but in decidedly non-traditional psychotherapeutic ways. And I think that's the conversation that many of us are longing to have. Give me the meat. Give me the spiritual nuggets. Tell me how this applies to my life, but don't make me have to sign up for a club in order to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we're living in a interesting and chaotic and for many would perceive as dark times right now. And in your book, you know, you talk about this sense within all of us, maybe that we have had, you know, a longing or a moment, whether it's the birth of a child or the witnessing of a sunset or, you know, any moment where we touch this sense that this is the way life is supposed to be, this deep sense that we're longing for this, what you call primordial oneness, this remembering of who we are. And yet we live in a world where externally we look around and our external world doesn't look like that on a regular basis. And we've just recently, you know, had the news of the new election with Trump's winning. There are a lot of people who are grieving right now. And there is a deep sense that something has gone wrong in the world. And how do we course correct? How do we come back to the principles that connect us? How do we return to love, which is the path to seeing a world and living in a world that we want to live in. Can you speak to that part, that thing within each of us that longs for that knowing, that is the thing that might draw us to a spiritual path, even though we're all on a spiritual journey, whether we know it or not? Can you speak to that piece that is that spark within us to make us ask those deeper questions?
What you're speaking to is a sense of disconnection, a sense of separateness from something essential. Like the Course in Miracles says, it's like an ancient melody that never totally goes away. Some hearkening to something we once knew. I once read a book, I think it was called The Paradise Myth. And it was talking about how within every religious or spiritual tradition, it is believed that there is some realm of perfection. The idea is that it's a realm of perfection from whence we come and to which we long to return. And living on this earth, the thought system that prevails on this planet is 180 degrees away from the thinking of God, love, heaven, paradise, whatever. And so there is this space of disconnection, right? Mm-hmm. So in Judaism, the principle is tikkun olam, repair the world. In Christianity, the idea when Jesus says, I stand in the breach, that in him heaven and earth have become as one, means, as the Course says, he lived on the earth, but thought only the thoughts of that higher frequency of love and peace. And that we can see him as a psychological guide, as an evolutionary elder brother, that we too can learn to actualize that repair, actualize that integration of the divine with our being human beings grounded on this earth. As you said, it's interesting when you said, how do we repair it? Well, it's interesting because you used the example of the presidential election. So you said many of us are grieving. Now, I obviously ran for the Democratic nomination. I did not vote for Donald Trump and so forth. So I understand the grief, although I was feeling it for a year and a half. But I would also point out many people are celebrating.
Sure.
So if we really want to bring the two together, that means we honor everyone's feelings. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's a really important part of this. What those of us who did not vote for Trump believe is that he increases the separation. But it's incumbent upon us to remember how many people feel he is going to heal it. Now, we all get to see it the way we see it. And if we really want to unify, we need to unify according to the principles on which this country stands. We stand on the principle that it's a free society. Nobody owes it to you to agree with you. Nobody has a monopoly on truth. And nobody owns this country. The unity comes from realizing, as the American principle is, out of many, one. Mm. Now, that is essentially a spiritual principle because it's the realization that even in spiritual terms, we're many bodies. But the whole idea of the Christ mind is that there's only one of us here, that we are all one. So we have to evolve as a human race. And this is an important issue. We learned this in school when we were kids, right, about evolution. When a species gets to the point where its collective behavioral patterns are no longer well adapted for survival of that species, one or of two things is going to happen. It's either going to evolve in a different direction or it's going to go extinct. Mm-hmm. And humanity has now gotten to a point where the collective habit patterns, behavioral patterns that we display are no longer well adapted for our survival. Even the Secretary General of the United Nations says we are on an unsustainable path. The way we separate ourselves from each other, separate ourselves from nature, all of the ways in which we are living according to a thought system that is so contrary to our nature. Mm. Now, if you look at it that way, you can see the great religious figures as the mutation, because that's what happens in those species that evolve, is the introduction of a mutation, some member of the species who demonstrates a better way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A better way. And when enough, doesn't have to be a majority, just a critical mass, interesting, enough people look at the alternative, someone demonstrating a better way, which in this case would be based on the idea that we are one and that we are here to love one another rather than that we are separate and we need to always have our dukes up, right? Mm-hmm. Enough of us move in that direction, then the planet will evolve. And I think so much of the turbulence that you refer to is because we are standing at this critical inflection point, which truly is, okay, humanity, you're going to change or you're going to face the serious possibility of dying off, mm-hmm. if not in our lifetime, then in our grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And, there's a line in the Course in Miracles, which is some people would rather die than change their mind. This is a very, very serious question because some people find the idea of change scary. Mm-hmm. Others of us find the idea of not changing scary.
Yep.
And that's a large part, actually, of what's going on at the deepest level, even politically. But we're living at a time when we're rethinking everything, Tori, and very much along the lines of everything that you said so far. We're rethinking politics, we're rethinking business, we're rethinking food, we're rethinking health, we're rethinking energy, we're rethinking spirituality and religion. So, you said a few minutes ago, we're living in a dark time. And I remember when I was a kid, there was a period of history they called the Dark Ages. And then later, people said, no, we shouldn't call it the Dark Ages, call it the Middle Ages. Because, based on everything you said, I'm sure you agree with me. Yes, it's dark on one hand, but in the midst of that, it's like when you look at the yin and the yang, within the yin, there's that dot, which means always the potential for more light or more dark. You know what I'm saying? Yep. So I think at this point, like I feel, you mentioned the election. Yes, I understand. Really, nobody knows better than me on a visceral level, really what goes on and all that.
Sure.
However, a lot of people woke up and a lot of people grew up over the last week. Because a lot of complacency led to this, a lot of distractedness led to this, a lot of willingness to look away from human despair over a period of decades. So I think that, what the Course in Miracles would say is that God has an answer to every problem the moment the problem occurs. If we bring in, like you said, how does something like the mystical Jesus apply? It's the idea that if we hold to love, but we have to hold to love, and that can't just be love for the people who agree with us.
Sure.
And there's this mean-spiritedness in the country today, on the left and the right. The way people talk about people who have the audacity to disagree with us, the regeneration and the renewal and the regreening will not come from there. But if we really try to understand each other, love one another, show respect to one another, atone for our own mistakes. Hello, genius. Where have you been for the last year and a half or whatever? Where have you been, And enough of us seek to atone for our own mistakes and forgive others for theirs and honor people for their experience. Martin Luther King said you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. Too many people just want to talk to people who already agree with you. I mean, there's no movement there. We have to, it's really a characterological change that's necessary now.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King said, in order to create the beloved community, we need external changes in our circumstances and also internal shifts in our souls.
Yeah.
And I said a lot on my campaign. I've thought a lot about our history because a lot of people look at American history. They only want to talk about what we've done right, which is kind of ridiculous because we've done a lot wrong. But then there are other people on the other side of the political spectrum who only want to talk about what we've done wrong. And no, we've done a lot right, too. And one of the things we've most done right is to correct our course when we were wrong. Yes, we had slavery. We also had the abolitionists. Yes, we had institutional suppression of women. We also had women suffragists. Yes, we had the Gilded Age. We also had the establishment of organized labor. Yes, we had segregation. We also had civil rights movement. So we need to do more than identify what was wrong. We need to identify with psychologically and emotionally the problem solvers. So this is a very challenging moment. I think, if you look at it spiritually, metaphysically, from a personal growth perspective, every single situation both invites us to rise to a higher place than we've been to before, and also tempts us to fall back into default patterns of ego.
Yeah.
And I see this as a collective moment of possibility. Yeah, it's tough. And we were born for this.
Yeah.
And it's our time. And rehearsal is over.
Yeah. You use that word ego and that temptation to fall into, this illusion of separation. Can you speak to what that is exactly and how that originated?
The ego mind is the mind that runs counter to the love of God within us. The absence of love is fear, just like the absence of light is darkness. You don't get rid of darkness by hitting it with a baseball bat. You get rid of darkness by turning on the light. You don't get rid of ego by just analyzing it, or where did I get this, or where did it come from, or who is to blame. You get rid of it by choosing in any moment, I am willing to see this differently. I'm willing to be who I was not before. I'll give you an example. When my daughter was little, okay, because I traveled a lot, I got in the habit, which I think when my daughter was small was reasonable and good, which was when I'm home, she deserves my time. So I got in the habit of saying no to social invitations. Okay? My daughter today is 34 years old. She doesn't even live on the same continent as I do. But I noticed I had gotten into habits of thank you so much, but no, I can't. Long past the time when, yes, you could.
Sure.
Right? Now, there, I don't think I'd call it functional versus dysfunctional, but there are ways where it is, where you just get in the habit of neediness. You get in the habit of jealousy. You get in the habit of negativity. You get in the habit of blame. You get in the habit of casting aspersions. You get in the habit of sarcasm. You get in the habit of judgment. You get in the habit of blame. And the ego is your own mind propelling you to that, just as the spirit is your own mind that propels you to the other. The problem is, just like in Romans in the Bible, conform not to the patterns of the world. We are living, Tori, in such a mean-spirited moment. If you wake up in the morning and you go directly to social media, directly to emails, directly to Twitter, whatever, you're just bombarded by the assault of the cacophonous, loveless, soulless perspective. It's like you were talking before, rearranging your perspective. So that's why the morning is so important. Even 5 minutes in the morning, whatever your prayer, meditation, mindfulness, reflection, allow your nervous system, just like in yoga, when you find the correct position, allow your nervous system to align itself with, I want to be a vessel of love today, like you did before we came on. You take the time. I align myself with love. I wish to be of use and a conduit for love. Now, on one hand, it's a direction to your subconscious mind, which is extremely important. That's not to say you'll be, that it's some guarantee that you're going to be an enlightened master all day. But the possibilities of your being aligned with the angels of your better nature is much greater. Because remember, no thought is neutral. That's very essential to this. So any thought that's not extending in love is projecting in fear. Any thought that is not given to making things better, showing up your best, as your best, gracing the life of the other person is going to be used in the service of neurosis, separation, exploitation, pathology, disharmony. So the Course in Miracles would say that every single moment we're making a decision. We're either making it consciously or we're making it unconsciously. Are you showing up with your heart open, showing up trying to be your best? Or are you just falling back into whatever BS you've picked up along the way? Yeah. And the role of Jesus, and remember, the Course in Miracles is not talking about an exclusive Jesus. This is not something where we're saying Jesus is the only way. He is one name on the door of the portal that is the only way, and that is unconditional love and forgiveness. Okay? But if you, like there's a lot of times when you go into a church, you'll see a piece of furniture for whatever reason. I don't know why it's written so often on furniture, but a quote from Jesus, do these things in remembrance of me. So if you walk into a room, let's say, and you blast it with love before you get there, one of the ways to do that is, let's say you're going into a conference room, and you see Jesus with his arms around every person in the room before you go in. Just take a moment. What the Course calls that holy instant. Blast it with love before you go. Jesus is one way to do that. Everyone subconsciously feels everything. Jesus, the very name, takes us to that place of our shared oneness. And these are the powers that are going to save us from our own insanity. That's what salvation means. The only thing to be saved from is our own insane, fear-based way of thinking. And that's what needs to be transformed today. And then collectively, that is our hope for changing the world.
Yeah, it reminds me of a couple things. I mean, the Hermetic principle, the first one about the universe is mental. Like everything that we see externally starts first as a thought that as above, so below, so within, as so without, as within, so without, and that the mind is where all things that we see originates. And it's this idea that like we come into the world connected and to our oneness. We still have not learned fear, but then as we grow, it's like these seeds almost get planted of this fear-based thinking. And then we get so used to it that we forget who we are. We forget our connection to oneness. We forget love, to think lovingly, to be that expression. And we become overly identified with the ego and with our separateness. And I love within the book that you talk about and use the visual idea of a wheel and how that actually connects us to our oneness. Can you kind of paint that picture for us, for those who are maybe still struggling to understand where they fit in and think that it's just me out here. I'm alone. I've got to take care of myself. I have to provide for myself. No one's coming to save me. So I'm separate, and I'm maybe thinking competitively or thinking, how can I get the next foot up, versus this idea that we all come from the same source and share the same, the fabric of who we are, the essence of who we are. Can you paint that visual picture for us in terms of what you describe in the book and what context that has for us today living in this modern world?
Well, everything you said was pure Course in Miracles, the thesis of the Course, which is that we are born with this internal knowing that there is oneness here. On the level of the physical senses, obviously, we're not one. You're there and I'm here. Within the three-dimensional reality, obviously, there is separation of the body. But on the level of the spirit, which the heart knows, there's the body's eyes and then the knowledge of the heart. There is no place where my spirit stops and yours starts. The Course in Miracles says you're like sunbeams to the sun, thinking you're separate from other sunbeams. You're like waves in the ocean, thinking you're separate from other waves. So think about the psychological difference between the two. If I'm a wave in the ocean, and I think of myself as separate from every other wave, given the enormity of the ocean, how could I not live in constant terror that another wave bigger than me will overwhelm me? I'm constantly afraid of annihilation. If I think of myself as one with the ocean moves, I move, the ocean moves. I'm part of this. I can't be separated from it. It's a feeling of safety. It's a feeling of peace. So if we identify with our separateness, then we feel we're living in a random universe that is ultimately meaningless. And that is, as you said, where most of us live. Like, I'm here alone. It's just me. I'm isolated over here. I've done some things right, some things wrong. People like me one day. They don't like me another day. My resume is okay. I look good enough. No, I don't look good enough. People like me. I'm too old. I'm too young. There's only so much to go around. I have to compete. You live in this constant wheel. And then it's not only that. And then sooner than I want to, I'm going to die and it's going to all be over. Well, that's a worldview of separation that is inherently painful. But it is painful because it is not true. The soul cannot feel comfortable within that construct because it is unnatural. What is natural is the realization that beyond this realm of perception, there's another way of looking at the world, where we realize, yes, we are on this material plane, and that's a lovely thing. But when we see that we're on the material plane and that the purpose of our lives on the material plane is to extend love, then even though when you have your body and I have mine, we can feel comfortable in relationship because we know that beyond the body's eyes, something else is going on. Mm-hmm. So it's an unlearning. You were talking about it's almost as though these thoughts get planted. No, it's not almost as though they do. Mm-hmm. From a very young age, we are taught the thought system of fear that dominates the world. From a very young age, we're taught to think unnatural thoughts. And natural thoughts begin to feel unnatural. And so what happens is that enlightenment, the Course says, is a shift in self-perception from body identification to spirit identification. Yes, I'm my body, but that's myself with a little s. Myself with a big S is part of the larger whole, which is the mind of God. You were talking about mind. The subtitle of the book is The Mind of Love.
Right.
And the Course in Miracles says God is a thought. You are an idea in the mind of God. Now, I'm sure everybody has heard of the notion promoted by the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, that if you go deep enough in your mind and deep enough in mine, that there are mental images we all share. It's what he called archetypes. Mm-hmm. The idea of the Christ mind is if you go deep enough into your mind and deep enough into mine, we share one mind. So that's where the image of the wheel. You have a wheel, it's got a hub, one single point, and then all these spokes go out from that. And then there's where the spoke is its position on the rim. We identify ourselves with our position on the rim, in which we're separate, but if you go down to the center of who we are, we share an identity. That's the real metaphysical meaning of there's only one begotten Son. So enlightenment is an unlearning. Mm-hmm. We have to unlearn one thought system in order to achieve another. And that unlearning and learning anew is the process of enlightenment. And that's why it's the key to not only our individual healing, but the healing of the world. When you really get that what you do to others, you're doing to yourself, and you might not see that immediately, but you will, because every thought creates form on some level, and every action has a reaction, you live very differently. Mm-hmm. I love how the Course in Miracles says, when you know these things, you become generous out of self-interest. Because you only get to keep what you give away.
Yeah. Yeah. This idea of love is such a major theme in A Course in Miracles and this book, Mystic Jesus, and A Return to Love, and so much of your work. And I'd love for you to differentiate between the spiritual concept of love that you talk about in the book and the conventional everyday idea of love that we experience in relationships and our culture. Because what I have found is, as I have studied this work, is that what I thought was love was not really love at all. And so, can you differentiate between this spiritual idea of love and what we as a society often seek or try to obtain and try to position ourselves in a way to achieve some type of love?
Well, the Course in Miracles says the Course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, but that is beyond what can be taught. It aims at removing the barriers to the awareness of love's presence. And even in the things where you say you learned that certain things were not love, I'm sure you also realized that at the time, your soul was seeking real love.
Absolutely.
So the ancient Greeks talk about, for instance, eros, which is sexual love, and romantic love, which sometimes becomes a conduit for what you see to be the real thing. Other times you realize it became a substitute for the real thing and caused more harm than good. At the highest level, there's agape. And agape is the love that includes those we don't like. Mm-hmm. And the love, I'll give you an example. When I was a little girl, when I was growing up, my mother used to talk about how important it was that a woman's main jobs were to care for her children and to care for her home. Now, when she used to say that, I thought, I was like that wave of feminism. I thought my mother was so retro and, oh, Mom, there's a whole world out there, blah, blah, blah. Years later, I realized archetypally she was correct. It's just that can't mean only your children. It's got to mean every woman's child. The love that will save us can't be just the love for our own children. And the idea of taking care of our home. None of us are going to survive unless we take care of our shared home, which is the earth itself. So the love that we need to evolve to has got to include even those with whom we disagree. Even those, Martin Luther King famously said, God said, I have to love my enemies. He didn't say I have to like them. It's not pretending that you agree with a person or even that you approve of their behavior, but it is the knowledge that there is within all of us a space of love and that we all forget it sometime, all of us. And those are called mistakes. There are those places within us where we all... You move into this place where the wires get crossed. It's like an emotional paralysis. And in any given moment, you don't feel like you know how to love and get your needs met. So and that's really what the journey is. It's kind of like when you have to coax a muscle, when a muscle becomes paralyzed and constricted.
Yeah.
That's really where we are. It's like it's just a muscle cramp. Fear is a muscle cramp. And lean into being a little kinder right there. Lean into being a little more generous right there.
Yeah, I love what you said about how the Course talks about not defining love or the meaning of love, but removing anything that stands in the way of love. And, what I think about is this idea that, like, for me, what I have found up until this point, that real love is synonymous with truth, that love is truth and truth is love and God is love. So truth is God, God is truth. So how can I seek truth first? And as I seek truth, I will run into love. But what separates me from truth is illusion and lies and deception and any part of myself that is hidden, where I'm trying to cover these things that I don't like about myself. Actually, that the more that I hide or the more that I lie is the distance that I find myself from, is the way that I distance myself from authentic love. But we do that because we think we need to protect ourselves in order to be safe. Can you speak to, for those who deeply, which I think we all do, we all crave and long for this reconnection to love itself, but we're so terribly afraid of being seen for all that we are. And we're trying to hide and protect and have this illusion of safety. Yet it's actually preventing us from experiencing what we so desperately crave.
Well, what you're talking about is so important because that becomes very, very obvious in intimate relationships, for instance. And the Course in Miracles says that's really where the rubber meets the road. Will the relationship be a holy encounter used by the Holy Spirit or the ego's playground? So there's the self with a small s, which is just your life in this one construct of your material reality. And then there's the self with a big S. And you don't have to do anything to create the self with a big S. Just be there. Just be there without armor. Be there, defenselessness. Just be there. Okay? But the ego mind says, no, you can't be that self. And the ego says that because that is the annihilation of the ego. So the ego says you have to, who you are is not possibly good enough. And if they see who you really are, they won't love you because what the ego calls who you really are might not be perfect, that you're a human being. So the ego says, put on a mask.
Yep.
And the mask is actually what makes us less lovable because all there is to love is not seen in that moment. Right? So practicing, and that's where childhood really matters. Because if you were brought up by parents who think who approve of you, and you got, so many studies done about this, about early childhood, and so many studies about girls with fathers. If the father makes you feel appreciated and loved for who you are, it doesn't, not for what you do. It's very painful to feel rejected by someone. And you say to yourself, I don't even know if I would have been rejected if I actually would have shown who I actually am. But I was so afraid of showing who I actually am that I didn't. And then I got rejected for that. And most of us have been there. I feel like my whole young adulthood was that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's that. And so we end up meeting mask to mask. And that's just a setup for disaster. And also what happens when you meet mask to mask is that it perverts your understanding of sex, because you are trying so hard to connect. Mask to mask, you can't connect. The ego says, well, if we have sex, then maybe we'll feel that oneness. But then sex becomes a substitute for the connection rather than the real connection, which is very liable ultimately to do more to separate us than to connect us. And that's why intimacy can be such an emotional disaster and can cause such suffering. And why the spiritual, really, I don't think anything is a greater spiritual challenge. You know, am I willing to just be, and you feel moved to be here, or you don't feel moved to be here, but I'm me.
Right. Right.
And if you don't stay here, it's because you don't belong here. And if you don't belong here, then I don't belong. It's not right for me either for you to be here, because it's a win-win universe.
Right. I mean, as I continue to walk this path, it's so funny. What I have found is that now the standard in my life is the pursuit of meeting face to face, not mask to mask.
That's right.
And yet I can't force, love is not forceful, and I can't force anyone to take off their mask. Do you have any advice for those who feel like, you know, I want to have that level of intimacy. I have the tools and the willingness to put down my armor, to put down my walls, and to come into this moment vulnerably, raw, authentically, and let myself be seen. Do you have advice, though, for those that are finding it difficult to be in relationship with those who maybe don't have that same level of understanding or willingness? How do we navigate those relationships?
Be careful with that one, because it does border on spiritual superiority. Other people long for intimacy just as much as you do.
Sure.
And anytime if someone is showing you their mask rather than their truth, they probably go home afterwards and say, damn, just like you do when you do that.
Yeah.
And the other person is just as afraid as you are. Now, 2 things of advice. Number 1, we teach by demonstrating. Just when you are simply a person without a mask, the other person on some level goes, you can do that? Secondly, see beyond their mask. If you're so smart that you know it's just a mask, see beyond it.
Yeah.
Now, don't get fooled, because that doesn't mean that they have developed on a personality level enough to show up for you without their mask. So I'm not saying necessarily tarry there.
Sure.
Right? But for you, the issue is to see beyond it. Everybody's trying. And never assume. And never, I think when it comes to love particularly, but really any relationship, avoid any thought that you've got it and they don't.
Sure.
Because if they're in your life, they're here to show you the limits to how much you've got it. And if you're moving into anything that has the sense of, oh, if only they were as advanced as me, then we could be in relationship.
Sure.
Right? Right? That's showing you're not as advanced as you thought you were. So in a moment that you are vulnerable in a positive way, defenseless is what the Course would call it. In that moment of spiritual nakedness, you are blessing another person simply being in that space. A person who is themselves ready for that will seek to meet you there. And if they can't meet you there, it's like I say all the time, and I think I wrote in one of my first book, if the train doesn't stop at your station, it's not your train. But you're trying to hold on to somebody whose really train doesn't want to stop there, is actually delaying the arrival, right, of someone who is the right train for you.
Absolutely.
So no matter what it is, it's the perfect lesson for us at the moment. And that's really the point here, that the universe is intentional, that everyone we meet, there is no such thing as he wasn't, quote unquote, the right one. No, he actually was. He was the right one for what you needed to learn in that moment. And if you didn't learn that, then you're going to keep meeting that one in some form.
Yeah. I mean,
the Course in Miracles says only what you are not giving can be lacking in any situation.
I've been really sitting with this concept of relational healing, how we are wounded in relationship and we also heal in relationship. And this idea that I found that I could only take myself so far in healing in isolation.
That's true. That's true.
Because what I found was that we all have shadow and parts of ourselves that we can't see, that are unconscious to us. And what I've found is that the relationships that I'm in, whether they're romantic or not, serve as the mirror for me to see myself, because there were people in my life that could see patterns of behavior and ways of being that I didn't even know I had, but they could see it because I can't see myself, right? I can't see myself, and the way that I see myself is through the mirror of relationship. Can you kind of speak to how relationships can be healing and how, in order for us to get better at them, that we actually have to engage in them? Because I know that there's part of us that would rather just hang up the towel and be like, this is, relationships are hard work. I can't make them work. There's that easy approach, kind of out. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, every encounter is either, as I said, a conduit of the Holy Spirit or playground of the ego. There is no such thing as I'm not going to do relationships anymore. If you're living on this planet, you're going to come in contact with other human beings.
Yes.
Every circumstance it involves relationship. The mistake we make too often is when we think of I'm in a relationship, only that sexual or romantic aspect of partnership. Everyone, your relationship to the bank teller, your relationship to the person who served you the food in the drive-in, your relationship to your employer, to your employee, to your colleagues, to everyone. And not only that, it goes even deeper than that to everyone you even think about. Not even your behavior with people, but even your thoughts about people, because all thought creates form on some level. So you're always in relationship. Even if it's that you're just thinking about someone, you are in relationship. And a mistake is when we think, I only want to do my relationship work with a partner. When really, if you don't get the relationship work down with people who are not your partners, you're not going to have the skill set with the partner.
Sure. Because
that romantic thing is like the PhD, right? So try to get fifth grade right. Do you know what I'm saying? Sometimes, there's an old line, love brings up everything unlike itself. Like you said, your shadow comes up. The Course says, don't look to yourself to find yourself, because that's not where you are. You find yourself in relationship. And when we pray to God to enter our relationships, it's like a magnifying glass is put of that particular dysfunction or that particular character defect. Well, be happy that you're working it out before you get to the PhD. Right?
Yeah.
And the Course in Miracles says, heaven is entered 2 by 2. Namaste, the namaste consciousness, that anytime you meet anyone, whether you're going for a professional lunch or personal lunch, whether you're talking to your child or you're talking to your spouse or a date, bless them in your mind. The spirit in me salutes the spirit in you. The love in me salutes the love in you. I always used to say, there'll be a big audience and I'll say, now I'm not going to ask for any show of hands, but did you pray today for the happiness of the person you slept with last night? And also, I think we're so we have to build up the self-esteem of our children. And we say to children, you can do it. I know you can. Well, grown-ups need that too.
Yeah.
Life is hard. Work is hard. And some of those things that are we just forget. Sometimes later somebody said, well, you knew I loved you. Well, actually, based on your behavior, And I've seen tragic endings. I've seen, deathbeds where people became, I lived with her for 25 years. I never took her to Paris. She was always begging me to, you know what I'm saying? I look to my own parents and I've realized things. My parents lived, they were married, I think, over 60 years. My mother was madly in love with my father. I know my father adored her. A successful marriage by any. And I have thought back over the years, they were so courteous to one another. They were so respectful of one another. On a certain level, they expected less of each other and got more. We have over-casualized romantic love particularly. I remember a woman who came to me for counseling, right? And she was dressed very nice. And she came to my office, my home at that time, and we spoke, and she was dressed very nicely, and she was lovely, and she was talking about her relationship with her husband. And I said, well, give me an example of what he has a problem with. She says, well, he just has a problem with the fact that I wear sweats all the time and I just slump around the house. She said, he has a problem with how I dress. I said, well, I think you dress beautifully. What's his problem? She said, well, that I just wear sweats and I slump around the house. I said, wait a minute. Let me get this right. You dressed up nice to come see me? But around your husband, you don't show up?
Yeah.
We're always asking in relationship, what are you doing for me? Rather than asking, am I showing up at my best?
Yeah. Right. It's that, what am I giving? We want to receive all of the time.
What am I not giving?
What am I not giving? What am I withholding? And it's like you said, it's unnatural to withhold, but it feels normal. I think so.
That's right. Well, unnatural feels natural. Absolutely.
Right.
And also, like what you said before, you don't even see it. We all have blind spots. So sometimes it is other people, who need to say, what are you doing? I sometimes think we don't do that enough with each other. We're so afraid of getting involved. Sometimes your best friend shakes you by the shoulder.
Yeah. I mean, that is loving to do that for each other.
That's right.
And I think
I love you, but do you see how you just talk to your husband or whatever?
Right. Exactly. And I, like you said, I think we have, because of our separateness, we're like, let me not get involved. That's not my problem. Let me stay out of it, versus saying, I love you so much. This is what I'm noticing. How do you, you know what I mean? And calling them forward. But we're so afraid of conflict. We're so afraid
Well, that's where nonviolent communication comes in. You don't want to just be spewing out unsolicited advice.
Absolutely.
You don't. That's not cool. They won't appreciate it, blah, blah, blah. But you can feel whether or not there's an openness, and you can actually ask permission. I do see something if you're open to some feedback, or, you feel that out.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there are times that we've been hurt. I mean, so many of us, every single one of us has been hurt, betrayed in some way, whether it's by a partner, a friend, a family member. I would love for you to explore the concept of forgiveness and what role it plays in our personal healing and our collective liberation.
Well, forgiveness, first of all, it's everything. But the way the Course in Miracles defines it is different than what we normally associate with the word. Because usually when we think of forgiveness, if we're honest with ourselves, I'm spiritual now. You were a jerk, but I will deign to forgive you. Well, that's the Course in Miracles says that's actually further judgment. Real forgiveness is when I realize on the personality level, you might have been an absolute jerk. But the personality level is not who you are. I am willing, in my mind, like you said, it's all in your mind. That's the level of cause. I am willing to extend my perception beyond what my physical senses perceive to what my heart knows to be true, which is you're perfect and loving and innocent the way you are. So the Course says, what are you thinking about this person that God would not be thinking? God's not thinking, she's such a bitch. What is God thinking about this person that you are not thinking? God is thinking they are my innocent child and I created them perfect. The Course in Miracles also says, what did they do right? Can you think of anything they've ever done right? Because you sure are concentrated on what they've done wrong. Because to the ego, guilt is its high point. Guilt is everything it's looking for. It's like a heat-seeking missile. Where you got it wrong, where you got it wrong, where you got it wrong. And we nitpick with the people we love the most. And we're always reminding people, and this is one of the problems in long-term relationships, because, you know, you're going to see the truth of that person. They don't do everything right. This is what makes people so often so excited to be with that new person who doesn't know you yet, right? So these disciplines, it really, you know, the word disciple and discipline come from the same root. And that's why if you start off in the morning, may I be a blessing on those in my life, the blessing on those I know as well as those I don't know. Because the ego would have you give less and less and less with the people that you actually love the most. Yeah. And care about the most. So forgiveness is not expecting people to always get it right. By definition, we all make mistakes. We're not perfect or we wouldn't have been born here. But the holy relationship, the Course says, is where you hold the space knowing if that person, their guilt, their mistake is going to come up, my mistakes are going to come up. Their ego is going to want to identify my mistake as my guilt. My ego is going to want to associate their mistake with their guilt. We will be pointing fingers at each other, more likely to abandon each other. And then the ego goes, yay! And then what just happened? In a holy relationship, you realize that's going to happen. Love brings up everything unlike itself. The issue is, can two people hold the space to know this is where it comes up? The detox has to come up in order to be released.
Yeah.
If I am understanding and you are willing to change and to hear me, the communication of those tender truths can become a holy space.
Yeah.
If we have compassion and non-judgment.
Yeah.
Now, like you said, what if the other person isn't there? Well, one of the lines in the Course is, whoever is saner at the time, if even one person is willing to join with you in that space. And the one last thing I'll say about that. In my life, some of the people that I have met, most adept at practicing all that, did not think in terms of religious or spiritual terms. And some of the people who do think in those terms, not necessarily.
Sure.
So your jargon's not going to save you here.
Yeah.
Your willingness to be real is what's going to save you.
Absolutely. I think I'd love for you to just also speak to the person who might be holding on to guilt or shame or resentment towards themselves. You know, I think our freedom, there's no better feeling for me than to like look back on my past and think through all of my most challenging experiences, whether they involved other people or myself in my own decisions, and not harbor like a resentment or a grudge. And that feels really good, really good. But I know that so many of us are in pain and we're in suffering because of what we're holding on to from the past. How do we, is it as easy as just allowing ourselves to receive the love, the love that we are?
Yeah, I understand. So the Course in Miracles says you can have a grievance or you can have a miracle. You cannot have both. Because miracles occur naturally as expressions of love. A miracle is when things correct themselves. One synapse of love leads to another. And even a synapse of fear transforms into a synapse of love. A grievance blocks the light. The Course says you're like people with your fingers in front of your eyes complaining that it's dark in here, even though the room is filled with light. Any thought of judgment or attack is blocking and deflecting the miracle. And that is as true whether it's towards someone else or towards yourself. Attacking yourself, judging yourself, blaming yourself is just as blasphemous as attacking, blaming, or judging others. The key to self-forgiveness is a principle called the atonement. The atonement is when you have to go back and look at what you did. That was the moment when I withheld love. That was the moment when I just plunged forward, ran forward with self-will, not thinking about other people. That was the moment when I forgot to pray about what to do and reflect on it and just went into this craziness. That was the moment. And you realize, the Course says, that in that moment, you didn't let the Spirit of God guide you. You didn't step back and ask your higher mind. You didn't ask the Holy Spirit. And so you got a result, a consequence that reflected your fear-based thinking rather than the love that you might have had. Now, this is what the Course says. Are you ready? You probably know, because you obviously know these principles. The love, the real you, S with, self with a capital S, is an undeletable file within the computer of your consciousness. And in every moment, what file am I bringing to the screen? In those moments that we hate ourselves for, that make us cringe to think about them, you didn't come out with, like you were saying before, your vulnerable, loving self. You came out with your dukes up or your whatever your behavior was. But the Course says the miracle that you could have had and would have had if you had been loving in that moment, that miracle is held in trust for you until you are ready to receive it. Learn the lesson. Because it's going to come back around. It might not be with that person, might not be in that town, might not be with that circumstance. It will be coming back around.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you'll be even better. The bone that's been broken is even stronger when it comes back together. The story of the prodigal son, the son who left and came back, the father was even more excited. You'll be even better. Than you were. You were a person who, in that moment, like we said before, didn't know how to love and get your needs met. You acted silly, dumb, stupid, self-sabotaging. Whatever you did, you blew the situation. Atone, place it in the hands of God now. Be willing to learn the lesson now. Atone for the error. The Catholics, you go to confession. In Judaism, there's the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. In AA, you have to admit your character defects, learn from it. You have to experience some pain. Only a sociopath has no remorse, has no conscience. What you did to yourself or what you might have done to others or how you blew an opportunity, it hurts. But you look at that, you learn from it, you grow, you experience real humility, contrition, you make amends if that's necessary, you place it in the hands of God, and you're going to come out a person who doesn't make that same mistake. And then somebody later down the line is going to say, you know what I really love about you is you're not like some of those other people who act blah, blah, blah. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, honey, if you only knew, it took a lot of work to get here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's how we grow.
I love what you said about the miracle being held in trust, because that makes me think of, it just like melts me. It makes me almost want to weep.
I know, me too.
Because
that's a line directly from the Course.
Because it's
held
like,
in trust for you until you are ready to receive it.
It's like, it's yours either way, whether you want it now or later.
Yeah.
And that's so beautiful.
Well, the Course says it is not up to you what you learn. It is merely up to you whether you learn through joy or learn through pain. And I think that that's what's happening on the earth right now. You guys are going to have to evolve. You're going to change. You're going to change because of accumulated wisdom, or you're going to change because you're going to bring on such incredible global catastrophe.
Yeah. Your choice. And we get to choose. And that's the beautiful thing about being a human, is that we get to decide which way we want to go, which path we want to walk.
And that we do decide in every moment, whether consciously or unconsciously.
Right.
And knowing that it's not your job to decide for other people, but every single moment to be disciplined with the decision you make for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you've been studying these principles and this work for decades now, and to write a book like Mystic Jesus had to be a very personal journey. I'm curious what you found this time around has been the most profound insight or spiritual revelation that you experienced while writing this book. Because so much of this and you've known for so long, was there something that just struck you as you wrote this as like something really, really powerful that was illuminated for you, or that you want other people to take away from reading this book?
Well, obviously, because it was a book about Jesus, the sense of his presence. And, it was a sense of a closer walk during that time, obviously. When you write any book, you just are hoping that for someone, there's an aha moment. Could there be an aha sentence? Could there be an aha paragraph? And a book, once you write it, have you written a book yet, Tori?
Not yet, but there's something cooking.
You will. So when you write a book, it's kind of like giving birth to a child. They go out into the world, they have their own relationships. And sometimes when people have brought a book of mine to a book signing, I'll open it up. I love to see what they underlined, what they put in yellow, what they highlighted, what they put a star. It's like, oh, that's so interesting that sentence, that they highlighted that sentence.
Yeah.
It's like theirs. Once it's out there, it's there. So that would be my hope. My hope is that the book finds its way into the hands of whoever could be served by it, comforted by it, inspired by it, illumined by it. And that's my hope.
That's beautiful.
And thank you for helping.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I pulled a card this morning after my meditation, and the card that I pulled said the words that want to be written. So I definitely feel that that's coming for me. And when I think about your book, and one of those paragraphs that I just underlined and highlighted and circled over and over for me in this book specifically was as when you said something about that I can experience the sun, but I don't own the sun. I can experience the breeze, but no one owns the breeze. I can experience the love of Jesus, but no one owns or has a monopoly on Jesus. And that's what I loved, because it really just anchored in this idea that Jesus is for all. You don't have to be a Christian to believe and to receive the love of Jesus and to learn the ways and the principles and the teachings of Jesus. And that really, really stuck with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for spending time with me on this show. Is there any final words that you have for our listeners and humanity right now?
Just thank you. I wish you the best.
Thank you.
You have yourself a very deep understanding of these principles, and it makes me happy to know that you're out there expressing them and teaching them and holding the space. And it was an honor to actually be talking to you. I wish you the best, and I hope we meet again sometime.
Absolutely. I will hold that vision. And yeah, this is just a ripple effect. I know this conversation will go on to touch, and we'll never be able to quantify, the impact that you have. But I trust that it has been received by those who are ready to hear it. And my ask for everyone who is still with us right now is that you would support this message by, maybe purchasing a book. If it, the holiday season is coming up, this is an amazing gift to give a loved one or a friend, put it in, under the tree for them, or just give them as an offering of something that's touched you. I know that the best gifts in my life have always been something that's given from the heart, that's thought of, when someone is thought of, and there's nothing better than when something has impacted your life to kind of continue to pay that forward and give that out in the world. So get a copy of Mystic Jesus, follow Marianne if you aren't already, and maybe share this episode with someone that you love and care for. You never know what it could spark within them and help illuminate on their path. Marianne, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you
for
so
your
much.
wisdom.
God bless you, honey.
Absolutely. All right, you guys, we will see you next week on the Coachable podcast. That's all for now. See you guys later.